Hi, my name is Kimberly Sayre, and this is my informational speech. Today I'm going to tell you about one of the greatest children's authors that ever lived. His name is Theodore, also known as Ted, Seuss Geisel, also known as Dr. Seuss. And in one of his books, The Lorax, he says, "Unless somebody like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better, it's not." Now when I hear this, I think about the great things Dr. Seuss did for children to help them learn to love to read. Dr. Seuss was born on March 2nd, 1904, in Springfield, Massachusetts. His father's name was Theodore Robert and his mother's name was Henrietta. His father was a brewmaster and his mother worked for her father's bakery. To learn the specials of the day, she would always make these little chants with them to help her remember them. She would use these chants later on when Ted would have problems sleeping to help him fall asleep. She would recite the chants for him. Ted says that helped him to learn to use rhythm to do things. Ted attended Dartmouth University, where he was an editor of the Jack-o'-lantern, one of the school papers. He was kicked off because of throwing a party that was illegal according to school policies. He still wanted to contribute to the paper, so he would just sign them Seuss, so nobody at the school would realize that it was him because of it being his middle name. After he finished at Dartmouth, his father asked him what he was going to do. He told his father that he had been accepted with a scholarship to Oxford University and he was going to be a professor. His father was overjoyed and called the local paper and had it published the next day. Ted had to tell his father that he really had not been accepted with a scholarship. His father, being the proud man he was, he scraped money together to send Ted to Oxford anyway. At Oxford, during his Anglo-Saxon for Beginners class, Ted met a woman named Helen Palmer, who would change his life. She told him, after seeing some of his doodles and drawings, that he should not be there to be a professor. He was wasting his time. He needed to be an artist. Ted did not realize at the time that in 1927 he would also marry this woman. After college, Ted was still contributing to different papers such as Vanity Fair, Life, and The Judge. He was submitting work to also different papers and had one accepted to Saturday Evening Post. When somebody from, somebody from Standard Oil saw his work, they called him and offered him a job. He worked for Standard Oil for a while doing their advertising. One of his most famous ones was for Flint Pesticides, where he did cute cartoon drawings and always had a bug coming into the situation and somebody said, "Quick Henry, grab the flint," and it became very famous. During World War II, Helen and Ted worked together to make some animated videos that were training videos for the soldiers. Now nobody thought this would work very well, but the younger recruits really took to them. They made two that were Academy Award winners, Your Job in Japan and Your Job in Germany. These were later remade into Oscar-winning films called Hitler Lives and Designed for Death. Now today it's very hard to find any of these videos. Another thing that was very controversial of Ted's that he did was he took his book, Martin K. Mooney, Will You Please Go Now, and changed the name to Ronald Reagan, Will You Please Go Now. Shortly after he wrote this, Ronald Reagan resigned. Many of his books have been changed into movies. Some of them include Horton Hears a Who, The Cat in the Hat, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, and in 2012, actually on March 2nd, 2012, they're planning on releasing the Lorax, which would have been Ted's birthday. Him and his wife, Helen, started a company together called the Beginner's Books. And if you look on the back of many of the books, it has the company on the back. Their plan was to, along with Ted and other writers, to make books that are easy for children to read. A turning point in his career was when he read an article called Why Johnny Can't Read. They said that children's books were too boring and that children were not interested. So that's when he decided to take the list of 400 basic words that children need to learn and use those to write his books. He took 250 and said he was going to write a book. In 220 words he came up with The Cat in the Hat. And then he had a bet. Somebody said he could not write a book 50 words or less that would be successful. One of the most famous books he ever wrote, Green Eggs and Ham, came about that way. Now, Dr. Seuss' first book he ever wrote was called And to Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street. How this book came along was he was on a luxury liner with his wife when the engine noise was driving him crazy. The rhythm of it was driving him crazy. So his wife said, why don't you use it to write your first book? And that's what he did, and that's how he came up with his first book. His wife died in 1967 of cancer, and she was very frail and in bad health. He remarried a woman named Audrey in 1968. Excuse me. He went on to write 44 different books, and sometimes he would not illustrate his own books. When he did not illustrate his own books, he would go by the name Theo Lessig, and when Lessig was his last name, Giselle, spelled backwards. He had many, many books like this. He also had one book that he signed Rosetta Stone, which was called Because a Little Bug Went Ka-Choo. After his death in 1991, a few more books were released of his. They were Daisy Head Maisie, which was based on his work, was not actually written by him, and Hooray for Diffendor Day. Now, one of his most famous books after his death was My Many Colored Days. Over 200 million of his books were sold before his death in 1991. And since then, well over 22 million books of his have been sold. Dr. Seuss had many honors given to him. From Dartmouth, he had the Honorary Doctorate of Humane Letters. Excuse me. He had Oscar for Gerald McBoing Boing in 1951 for Best Cartoon. 2 Emmys for Best Children's Special, Halloween is for the Grinch in 1977, and The Cat in the Hat in 1982. Now these were made into animated TV specials. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 1984, and a Peabody for animated special for How the Grinch Stole Christmas and Horton Hears a Who. He also won the Caldecott Award for 3 of his books, McElliot's Pool, Bartholomew and the Uberbleck, some of his words are very hard to pronounce, I'm sorry, and If I Ran the Zoo. Those were in 1947, 1949, and 1950 respectively. In 1980, he was awarded the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award. And I just want to finish up by saying, and when he died in 1950, the last book he wrote, 1991, the last book he wrote was Oh, the Places You'll Go. The last line he had in this book is, you're off to great places, today's your day, your mountain is waiting, so go get on your way. Now when I hear that, it's like him saying that, you know, he is done writing his books, but he wants children to keep going, keep reading, keep enjoying his books. Thank you.